Hey guys, tonight we are stepping straight into the dim and smoky air of a medieval cottage. The fire on the hearth has smoldered all night, leaving a haze that stings the eyes just enough to make you blink slowly, as though the morning doesn't quite want to arrive. Your back creaks like the old beams overhead when you stretch. Stiff from sleeping on straw that's more prickly than plush, you pull the rough wool blanket aside, and there it is again, the daily reminder. Another full day of shoes, boots, and endless mending ahead. You probably won't survive this, at least not without a cup of something stronger than thin ale. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and your local time in the comments, because I love seeing just how far this sleepy little village of ours stretches across the map. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle to the hearth, prodding the embers with an iron poker. They glow reluctantly, and with a careful breath, you coax a weak flame back into life. The smell of last night's ash clings to your tunic. No amount of beating it out will change that. Historians still argue whether early cobblers were more often itinerant, wandering with their kits across villages, or rooted like you are, tethered to a bench that seems to sag under the weight of other people's souls. Either way, the evidence is clear. Shoes mattered, and so did the hands that kept them alive. You reach for the leather scraps stacked in a crooked pile by the wall. Some are stiff cowhide, others softer goat, the kind children beg for to fashion toy slings. And here's a quirky bit. In a few parts of medieval Europe, people genuinely believed scraps of shoe leather boiled into broth could soothe a bad cough. You wrinkle your nose at the thought, wondering if today will bring a request for a remedy alongside repairs. The cottage is quiet, except for the crackle of kindling and the faint drip from a roof that never seems to keep the weather out. You slide onto your low stool, legs folding in the same familiar way, tools spread out like an extension of your fingers. An awl, a curved needle, waxed thread, each waiting for the rhythm of the day to begin. There's comfort in it, even as you sigh at the sheer repetition. Cobblers didn't shape history's grand battles or treaties, but they left their imprint in every footprint that marched across muddy fields. Outside, the roosters start their chorus, and you know soon enough the first neighbor will tap on your door. But for now, there's just the warmth of the hearth, the creak of your bench, and the quiet promise that this day, like every day, will be measured in stitches, soles, and the weight of leather in your hands. And speaking of rhythm, if you're still awake, this is your little nudge. Go ahead and like the video. Maybe subscribe if you haven't yet. It helps keep this sleepy workshop alive. The morning air shifts, the door groans, and footsteps crunch on the dirt outside. Your first customer is about to arrive. The door creaks open with the kind of tired groan that makes you think even wood has its aches in this damp little village. The light spilling in from outside is thin and gray, the kind of dawn where the sky hasn't yet decided whether it will bless you with sunshine or drench you with drizzle. A familiar silhouette lingers at the threshold. A farmer you've patched and shod so many times you could probably trace the pattern of his boot leather in your sleep. He ducks his head through the low frame, muttering about his clogs before he even greets you, holding one in his calloused hands, like a child showing off a broken toy. You wave him toward the bench. The smell of damp earth clings to him, evidence of fields worked before most people in the village even thought of waking. His boots tell the story. Soles cracked open like a dry loaf of bread, heels worn down to nothing. A cobbler learns quickly that every pair of shoes is basically a diary, one that records long days, trudges to the market, muddy harvests, and winter's cold hunts. You nod at the damage with a theatrical sigh, as though it's shocking to you, though you've seen this 1,000 times before. As he sets them down, you catch yourself remembering a detail you once read in some dusty chronicle. In the early Middle Ages, shoes were often just a flat piece of leather tied to the foot with cords. Simple, effective, and completely useless in the muck of northern fields. The shoe beneath your fingers is more elaborate. Stitched upper, reinforced sole, even a faint trace of polish where he might have rubbed animal fat into the leather to keep the rain out. Historians still argue whether innovations like heels began with riders needing grip in their stirrups, or if they came about as some vain noble wanted to appear taller. You chuckle quietly at the thought of some farmer strutting around like a peacock in tiny stacked heels. Imagine him trying to chase pigs that way. You prod at the crack in the sole, testing its give. The farmer watches nervously, as though you might scold him for walking wrong. Leather's like people, you mutter, more for yourself than him. Treat it well, and it'll last. Ignore it, and it falls apart before your eyes. He scratches his head, as though you've said something deep, though really you're just stalling for time. The truth is, you'll fix these clogs because that's what you do. Shoes may not change the world, but they change the day for someone who spends dawn till dusk tramping through mud. You fetch your awl, its wooden handle worn smooth by years of your grip. Tools in a cobbler's shop are like friends, familiar, dependable, sometimes stubborn. Waxed thread lies ready, smelling faintly of beeswax and smoke. A hammer with a short handle sits within reach, its surface dimpled from countless taps. Each item feels heavier than it should at this hour, but also comforting, like an extension of your own limbs. As you line up the sole and begin the first stitches, you fill the silence with chatter. That's the unspoken bargain. Customers don't just come for repairs, they come for stories, for a moment of gossip in the middle of their slog. You ask about his ox, about the yield of his barley, about whether the miller is still cheating with his weights. He grunts in reply, words coming slowly, but the act of being asked seems to ease his shoulders. Somewhere between his mutters, you slip in a joke about shoes talking back, how his boots are practically screaming at you to retire them. He actually laughs, a short wheeze like bellows catching. The stitching pulls tighter, the leather drawing back into shape. You notice how your hands move without thought now, each thrust of the awl, each pull of the thread in rhythm with your breath. There's something meditative in it, like monks chanting, "Only your prayers are to souls and heels rather than saints." And speaking of saints, here's a quirky tidbit you once overheard at the alehouse. Saint Crispin and Saint Crispinian, patron saints of cobblers, were said to have given away shoes to the poor while working secretly at night. Some villagers believe whispering a prayer to them while mending brings good luck. You don't bother with the prayers yourself, though sometimes, when a repair is especially tricky, you find yourself muttering their names under your breath, just in case. The farmer yawns, sitting on the edge of your bench, watching your progress like a child eyeing a sweet. He asks if the leather you use now is the same as what the nobles get. You laugh, shaking your head. Nobles might pay for supple calfskin, dyed in expensive shades, even tooled with patterns no one sees beneath their gowns. What he gets is cowhide thick enough to stop a draft. Both serve their purpose, though the gulf between them feels like the difference between stew and banquet. Historians still argue whether footwear was truly a marker of class, or if practicality sometimes trumped vanity in the muddy villages. Looking at his boots, you suspect vanity never stood a chance. You set the finished clog down with a soft thud. The repair isn't pretty. None of them are. but it will carry him through another season, maybe two if he's lucky. He pulls them back eagerly, muttering thanks, and digs in his pouch for payment. A few coins clink onto the bench, their surfaces dull from countless hands. You know better than to haggle. Every coin is hard-earned in soil and sweat. Sometimes you accept onions, or a handful of beans instead. Barter is the real currency here, and you've patched more shoes for fish and firewood than silver. The farmer slips on his repaired clog, stomps his foot once, and nods in satisfaction. You watch him leave, the door closing with that same weary groan, his boots now steady on the dirt path. For a moment, the workshop is quiet again, the only sound the faint whistle of wind through the cracks in your roof. You sit back, rolling your shoulders, feeling the ache already building in your spine. Another day, another soul saved. You glance at the pile of leather scraps beside you. The morning's just begun, and already you can tell it will be long. The pile feels heavier than it looks, as though each scrap carries the weight of the day ahead. Somewhere in the distance, church bells begin their slow toll, calling the village to life. And you, Cobbler, are readying for the stream of boots that will march through your door. The church bells fade into silence, and you barely have time to sip a swallow of yesterday's watered ale before the next set of footsteps crunches across the dirt outside. A knock, two sharp raps, and one hesitant tap echoes on the wooden door. You know that rhythm well. It belongs to a farmer who always approaches life as though it's apologizing for itself. Sure enough, when the door creaks open, there he is, stooped from years of bending over fields, holding a pair of clogs that look more like battered firewood than footwear. He shuffles in, hat in hand, muttering a greeting that sounds like an apology. He sets the clogs down on your bench with such gentleness you almost laugh, as if these cracked old things were rare relics. You pick one up and tilt it, watching the morning light reveal splits in the leather, the nails protruding like tired teeth. "They've seen better days," you say, and he chuckles sheepishly. The truth is, shoes often outlast the people who wear them. Archaeologists have found medieval soles buried in damp soil that look almost new, long after their owners became dust. You imagine future diggers finding this farmer's clogs centuries from now, scratching their heads at the layers of patches, wondering how on earth one man managed to walk so far on so little. Historians still argue whether peasants were miserly with their footwear because of poverty alone, or whether practicality bred a strange kind of pride. Boots patched 10 times showing resilience rather than neglect. You run your thumb along the cracked edge, feeling how thin the leather has become. It's soft, worn down like parchment turned too many times. As you test the stitching, the farmer blurts out, "Don't make it too pretty, just make it last." You grin, promising him both, though you know pretty is rarely in the cards when your palate is mud, nails, and leather scraps. You lay the first clog on your lap and reach for your curved needle, threading it with waxed cord. The thread slides through your fingers, sticky and warm, the smell of beeswax faint but comforting. The farmer watches you closely, his hands fidgeting, as though afraid you'll scold him for letting the shoes fall to such ruin. To ease him, you start talking. You tell him about a rumor you once heard in the alehouse, that in ancient Egypt, people stuffed crocodile dung into their sandals to ward off blisters. He lets out a startled laugh, louder than you expected. "Better dung than walking barefoot," he mutters, and you both grin at the absurdity. Jokes aside, you remind him, softly, soothingly, that shoes are more than protection. They're dignity. Nobody wants to trudge into the market with toes poking through, even if everyone else is just as poor. The needle bites into the leather, your hand steady with years of repetition. Each stitch is slow, deliberate, pulling the shoe's broken mouth back together. Your rhythm becomes almost musical, a steady puncture, pull, and knot. The farmer leans closer, watching as though the shoe itself is healing under your touch. You explain that cobblers in some towns left small maker's marks inside the sole, tiny crosses, initials, sometimes even hidden blessings, so that a bit of them walked along with the wearer. Historians still argue whether those marks were for superstition or simple pride. But you like the thought of your handiwork traveling farther than you ever will. A gust rattles the roof, shaking loose a sprinkle of dust onto your bench. The farmer swats at it nervously, and you laugh, assuring him your repairs are sturdier than your cottage. He doesn't look entirely convinced. You slip in another stitch, tugging firmly, and let your voice wander into storytelling again. You talk about how some wealthier towns once passed laws about shoes, limiting the length of the toes, the color of the leather, even the height of the heel, because fashion was seen as a threat to order. You smirk, imagining this farmer being fined for daring to wear boots too elegant. Good thing yours aren't guilty of vanity, you say dryly, and he laughs again, a sound that relaxes both of you. The repair moves quickly now. You wedge in a fresh strip of sole leather, hammering tiny nails with quick, rhythmic taps. The noise echoes in the small room like a heartbeat. Each strike feels final, a punctuation mark on a sentence you've written with leather and thread. The farmer sits straighter, watching the transformation from wreck to wearable. For a fleeting moment, he almost looks proud. You pause, wiping sweat from your forehead, and let your mind drift to the wider world. Somewhere far beyond this damp village, nobles ride in stirrups gilded with brass. Monks shuffle in soft sandals along cloisters. Merchants parade in boots are polished till they gleam. And here, in your smoky little shop, you stitch dignity back into the lives of men who walk only from field to field. Yet isn't that the heart of history? The ordinary footsteps that outnumber the famous ones by the thousands. The farmer clears his throat, pulling you back to the present. He asks if you've ever considered moving to the city, where cobblers might earn more. You shrug. Cities bring customers, but also competition, guild rules, and more taxes than you care to count. Here, people may pay with onions and gossip, but you know their names, their stories, their rhythms. You remind him, half joking, that in towns you'd have to polish nobles' boots till your back broke, while here, at least you only battle mud. He nods, satisfied, as though you've made a profound choice, instead of admitting you're too stubborn to leave. The last stitch tightens, the last nail taps flush. You hand him the clog with a flourish, as if presenting a jewel. He turns it over in his hands, marveling, though it's only patched leather. He slips it on, stamping his foot experimentally. The sole holds, his face softens, relief replacing worry. He reaches into his pouch and pulls out not coins, but a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside are eggs, fresh from his hens, payment in yolks instead of silver. You nod, grateful. Eggs are rarer than pennies here, and tuck them carefully on a shelf beside yesterday's onions. Barter keeps you fed, as surely as shoes keep feet dry. As he leaves, you call after him with mock sternness. Don't bring them back tomorrow with holes already. He laughs over his shoulder, waving as he disappears into the gray morning. The door shuts, and silence returns, broken only by the faint hiss of the hearth. You stretch, feeling your spine pop like the beams overhead. Another pair saved, another trade sealed. And yet the day has barely begun. You glance at the tools spread before you, ready for the next soul in need of souls. Somewhere outside, the village stirs louder, hooves clopping, voices rising, the smell of bread drifting faintly through the damp air. You lean back on your stool, rubbing your sore hands, waiting for the next knock. And it comes, quicker than you expect. The next knock is firm, quick, and confident. Not the hesitant tap of a farmer worried about coin. Not the meek shuffle of someone bringing shoes so far gone they look like collapsed roofs. This one carries a rhythm that says, "I have business," and you have no choice but to hear it. You grunt, set down the half-trimmed scrap of leather in your lap, and open the door. There stands a man you've come to know too well. The kind who straddles the line between customer and nuisance. A traveling trader, face sharp as a hawk, with a cloak that has clearly seen many markets, but still pretends to be fashionable. In his hands, a pair of boots gleams with neglect. They were once fine, dyed deep brown, with stitching that might have impressed you in your apprentice years. But now the seams gape, the leather dries and curls, and the soles flap like tongues begging for mercy. He holds them out without greeting, eyes darting around your workshop as though checking for hidden treasure. You take the boots and sigh dramatically. "What have you done to these?" you ask, shaking your head like a physician faced with a hopeless patient. He smirks, unfazed, and insists, "They need to shine. I'm meeting a guildmaster in the next town, and dull boots are the death of business." You bite back a laugh. If dull boots are fatal, half the village should be buried already. You motion for him to sit. He drops onto your bench, already launching into a story about his travels. You only half listen. Traders always talk as though every deal they make changes the world. But you know better. Most of it is onions for salt, wool for wine, promises for promises. Still, as your needle dips into the cracked seam, you nod and hum in the right places. Here's a fact you remind yourself of. Cobblers were sometimes seen as lesser craftsmen compared to guild weavers or masons, yet traders needed you more than anyone. What good is a fine cloak if your boots split in the mud halfway to market? Historians still argue whether shoemakers ever truly earned respect in medieval towns, or whether they lingered on the edge of dignity, useful but overlooked. You lean toward the latter, especially when customers like this one bark orders bombast while paying in clipped coins. You clean the boots first, scraping dirt that looks suspiciously like it's been there since last autumn. The trader continues bragging about a bargain he struck on peppercorns, precious enough that he jingles a small pouch like it's gold. You mutter a dry joke about seasoning stew with his boots, and he snorts, though you can tell he doesn't enjoy being the butt of it. The repairs move steadily. Your awl pierces, thread pulls tight, leather bends under persuasion. You add a new strip of sole, tapping nails with care. The rhythm fills the space, drowning out his endless boasting. You polish with a dab of tallow, working it into the leather until it sighs under your cloth. Slowly, the boots regain a hint of their old shine. Not noble, but respectable. As you work, you think of one of your favorite quirks of shoe history. In some medieval courts, people believed the smell of new leather was healthful, even protective. Some nobles would keep a fresh pair of boots near their bed, never worn, just to inhale the pure scent. You glance at the trader and wonder if he'd pay you extra for bottled shoe smell. You nearly laugh out loud at the thought, but you swallow it down. letting only a sly smile escape. He notices the shine returning and grows impatient. "Will it last?" he asks, leaning in as though doubting your skill. You meet his gaze with the kind of calm that unnerves talkers. "They'll last longer than your patience," you reply. He shifts, frowns, then chuckles awkwardly, pretending he finds it funny. Customers like him rarely thank you sincerely. They see repairs as a transaction, not a service. But you know the truth. Without your hands, his deals would falter in the mud. You finish with a flourish, setting the boots down so the morning light catches their polished surface. He picks them up, inspecting every seam like a suspicious merchant counting coins. After a long pause, he nods, grumbles something about fair work, and reaches into his cloak. He produces coins, clinks them onto your bench, then tries to haggle backward, claiming the shine isn't worth full price. You arch a brow. If they weren't worth it, you'd still be walking barefoot to the guildmaster, you say, voice calm, almost bored. That tone often disarms more than anger. He grimaces, shuffles the coins, and finally leaves the full sum. Not graciously, of course. Traders never surrender gracefully. He stomps out, boots clutched like trophies, muttering under his breath. The door shuts, and the quiet that follows feels like a gift. You let out a long breath, shoulders slumping, tools resting in your lap. Outside, the village noise swells. Donkeys braying, women calling to each other, hammers echoing from a smithy down the lane. Life never pauses, but in your little shop, you carve out moments of stillness between knocks. You glance at your bench, littered with scraps and shavings. A cobbler's day is never tidy. It's measured in bits of leather underfoot, the smell of wax and hide, the ache in your back. Yet there's pride hidden in the mess. Each repaired seam, each patched sole, means someone walks a little easier. That's a legacy, even if no one carves your name into stone. As you wipe your tools clean, your thoughts wander again. Historians still argue whether medieval shoes were more about function or status. You suspect the answer is both. The farmer's clogs carry him through mud. The trader's boots open doors in guild halls. And you live in the space between, stitching dignity into leather one thread at a time. The hearth crackles, its warmth soothing, though smoke curls stubbornly into your eyes. You squint, muttering that one day you'll fix the chimney, though you've said that every winter. You pick up a scrap of leather and toy with it, fingers tracing its grain. Outside, the sky brightens slightly, hinting at sun, though clouds still loom. Another day, another pair mended. You take a long breath, stretching your stiff shoulders. The rhythm of the awl and thread lingers in your hands, a ghost of movement, even in rest. You know it won't be long before the next figure appears at your door, carrying more leather stories for you to mend. And as you settle back onto your stool, the air shifts, footsteps again, lighter this time, hesitant. The door creaks slowly, and in the frame appear not farmers or traders, but children, wide-eyed, clutching scraps of leather like treasure. The children hover at the doorway like sparrows, unsure if they're welcome. Their small hands clutch scraps of leather they must have scavenged from the pile you tossed outside days ago. One boy wears a tunic 2 sizes too large, the sleeves dangling like sails. A girl hides behind him, her braid fraying into wild strands. Eyes wide, as though stepping into your smoky shop is a daring adventure. You lean back on your stool, feigning sternness, though a smile tugs at your lips. "Well then," you say, What brings you little foxes to my den? They shuffle forward, placing the scraps on your bench with great ceremony. Can you cut these? The boy asks, his voice cracking with both nerves and hope. We want to make slings, the girl adds quickly, as though rehearsed. You chuckle, shaking your head. Slings? So you can terrorize the geese again. They grin guiltily, and you sigh with mock despair. Truth is, children begging for scraps is as old as cobbling itself. Leather, even in tatters, becomes treasure in their hands. Pouches, straps, toys. Archaeologists have found tiny makeshift shoes in village digs, so small they could fit dolls, stitched with clumsy fingers. Historians still argue whether those were toys or practice pieces made by apprentices barely taller than your bench. You suspect both. Looking at these children, you see yourself years ago, fumbling with needles under a master who never spared the rod. You take the scraps and trim them with your knife, slicing smooth strips. The children watch, eyes wide at each curl of leather falling like ribbons. There, you say, handing them the pieces. Strong enough to knock an apple from a branch, but if you break any windows, tell them it wasn't my leather. They giggle, clutching the strips as if you've gifted them jewels. The boy lingers, though, his gaze fixed on your tools. How do you do it? He blurts. His hand hovers near the awl, reverent, as if it were a holy relic. You pause, studying him. That question carries more weight than he knows. For a moment, your mind drifts to your own apprenticeship, when your master first placed a needle in your hand and barked, "You'll bleed before you learn, but you'll learn." And you did. Fingers pricked, back bent, patience beaten into your bones. You pick up the awl and press it gently into the leather on your bench, showing the boy how it pierces without splitting. Then you thread a needle, tugging waxed cord through with a practiced flick. It's not the tool, you say softly. It's the rhythm, like breathing, like walking. In, out, pull tight. In, out, pull tight. The girl mimics the motion in the air, her tongue poking from her mouth in concentration. You laugh gently, handing them a scrap already stitched in half. Try pulling, you say. They tug with all their might, and the seam holds. Their eyes widen, and the boy whispers, "It's magic." You shake your head. Not magic, just patience, which, by the look of you two, is rarer than gold. That earns a pout, and you ruffle his hair. Here's a quirky tidbit you share. In some villages, cobblers' apprentices were called snobs, a word that originally meant someone who made shoes. Over time, it twisted into an insult for people pretending to be better than they were. The children laugh at the idea, one declaring, "Then you must be the snobbiest of them all." You bow dramatically, accepting the title as though it were royal. The mood lightens, but then the girl glances at the door nervously. "We should go," she murmurs. You sense it too. Chores waiting, mothers calling. A world outside your shop that doesn't pause for wonder. They gather their scraps, murmuring thanks, and dash out like startled birds. The door slams shut, leaving you in smoke and silence again. You sit back, the echo of their laughter lingering. Your bench feels heavier now, as though the absence of their bright eyes has left a shadow. You remember being that age, dreaming of shoes grander than the world could hold, imagining boots stitched so fine they'd carry you to cities glittering with lights. Instead, you remain here, stitching clogs for farmers, patching boots for traders. A small life, yet a steady one. Historians still argue whether medieval craftsmen aspired to greatness or simply accepted their lot. You suspect both. Dreams tug one way. Hunger tugs the other. The hearth pops, snapping you back. You stir the coals, feeding them with a sliver of wood, and the flame answers with a lazy sigh. Your hands itch for work, so you gather the scraps scattered across your bench, sorting the useful from the useless. The pile grows neat again, order imposed on chaos. That, too, is the cobbler's craft, turning ruin into rhythm, disorder into stride. Outside, the village hum rises, voices bargaining in the lane, the distant clatter of the smith's hammer, the bark of a dog chasing hens. You close your eyes briefly, letting the sounds fold into the heartbeat of the day. For all its smoke and drudgery, this life carries a strange calm. You are needed, if not celebrated. Shoes wear out, and so long as feet walk, they will find their way to your bench. The thought comforts you, though a pang lingers. You wonder what became of those who once shared your trade in towns far away. Did they rise to wealth or fade into dust, their names lost even to guild rolls? You whisper a silent thanks to St. Crispin again. Whether saint or story, his name feels like company. Your fingers trace a fresh hide waiting in the corner, smooth, thick, rich, with the scent of tallow. A noble's servant left it last week, promising payment when his master's boots were finished. That task looms heavy, but for now, you let it rest. One day at a time, one soul at a time. You stretch, bones popping, and glance at the door. Already, you sense another shadow drawing near. The day rolls forward, carrying with it new stories stitched into leather. You inhale, slow and steady, and ready your hands for the next task. The door creaks once more, and this time, the sound that follows isn't the heavy tread of a farmer or the swaggering stomp of a trader. It's the patter of lighter feet, almost hesitant, like raindrops testing the roof before a storm. When you glance up from your bench, you see them again. Children, though not the same pair from earlier. This group is smaller, younger, and far more chaotic. 2 boys and a girl tumble into your shop, as though your threshold were the edge of a stage. They giggle, point at your tools, and whisper in the secretive tones children use when they think adults can't hear. You sigh, already bracing yourself. Children have a way of finding scraps you didn't even know you had. Sure enough, one boy spots a strip of leather curled like a snake near your stool and snatches it up, holding it aloft like a trophy. "For a sword," he declares, swinging it in mock battle. His friend ducks dramatically, knocking over your small pile of nails. The clatter rings like tiny bells, scattering across the floor. You pinch the bridge of your nose, but you can't quite suppress a smile. You scoop up the nails carefully, muttering under your breath about armies invading your workshop. "If you're here for scraps," you tell them, "you'll have to earn them." Their eyes widen. The girl leans forward eagerly, asking, "Earn them how?" You tap the bench. "By sweeping the floor. Tools and scraps are a cobbler's treasure, and you've just scattered mine." They groan. But the boy with the leather sword grabs the broom leaning against the wall, clearly delighted to wield another prop. As they sweep clumsily, you find yourself slipping into stories again. "When I was your age," you begin, "I begged my master for scraps. He gave me nothing but blisters. Said the leather was too precious." You pause for effect, letting them glance nervously at you. "But when he wasn't looking, I stole a strip and stitched my first pouch. Crooked stitches, ugly as sin, but it held beans all the same." The girl's mouth forms an O, impressed. Historians still argue whether cobbler apprenticeships truly began in childhood or later in adolescence. Some records describe boys as young as 7 pricking their fingers raw, while others insist training didn't begin until you were old enough to hold steady. You shrug to yourself, remembering how your master's patience was shorter than his temper. Either way, the trade grips early, your back bent before your voice deepens. The children finally gather the nails into a neat pile. You clap lightly, awarding them each a scrap from your bench. Their eyes gleam, as though you've handed them silver coins. One boy asks if he can make a pouch like yours. You show him how to fold the strip and punch holes with an awl. He gasps when the leather yields, the tiny puncture neat and round. "Like magic," he whispers. You smile, correcting him. "Like patience. Remember that." Here's a quirky tidbit you share as they fumble. In some places, people believed a child who wore a cobbler's scrap tied around their wrist would be protected from evil spirits. One of the boys immediately ties his strip like a bracelet, puffing his chest out as though invisible shields now surround him. The girl laughs, but her eyes linger on her own strip with quiet thought. For a moment, the workshop transforms. The smoke, the clutter, the endless ache in your spine. None of it matters. Their chatter fills the air with something lighter than work, almost joyful. You catch yourself remembering how you once dreamed of shoes carrying you beyond this village, perhaps to towns where guild halls tower and streets bustle. Dreams fade, but scraps of them live on in children's eyes. The door creaks again, and a familiar voice calls from outside. A mother's tone, sharp enough to slice through giggles. The children freeze, then scramble, clutching their leather treasures. They thank you hurriedly, bows awkward, but sincere, before dashing out like startled sparrows. The shop falls silent once more, dust swirling where their feet disturbed it. You sink back onto your stool, exhaling slowly. The quiet feels heavier now, almost too still after the storm of laughter. You glance at the scraps left behind, imagining tiny hands fashioning them into pouches or bracelets. It's a small legacy, perhaps, but one that lingers in the rhythm of play. Historians still argue whether trades like yours truly shaped communities or merely patched them together. You suspect the truth lies somewhere in between, like stitches, unseen but holding lives in place. The hearth spits, sending a spark into the dim room. You stir the coals absent-mindedly, watching smoke curl upward. The smell of leather and ash blends into a scent that clings to everything you own. Some might call it unpleasant. To you, it smells like continuity. Work done yesterday, work waiting tomorrow. Always the same, yet never identical. Your hands wander back to the boots still waiting on your bench. Another farmer's pair, less ruined than most, but eager for your touch all the same. You pick up the awl, your body sinking back into rhythm. In out, pull tight. In out, pull tight. Like breath, like heartbeat, like the passing of hours in a day that stretches, yet somehow slips too quickly away. The village outside swells with sound, women calling from windows, the clang of the smith at his forge, dogs barking, children shrieking in play. All of it blends into a backdrop for your solitary work. You are part of it, though always slightly apart, tethered to your bench as firmly as leather to sole. It is lonely, yes, but also certain. Shoes will always break. Feet will always walk. And you, cobbler, will always wait with needle and thread. You pause, flexing stiff fingers, and wonder, briefly, wistfully, whether those children will remember you one day, whether they'll recall the scraps, the stories, the way your shop smelled of wax and smoke. Perhaps they'll laugh about it in some alehouse years from now. Or perhaps, like leather worn thin, the memory will simply fade. Either way, you know the pattern. Footsteps will return, shoes will collapse, and hands, young or old, will reach for yours. The next knock, heavier this time, interrupts your thoughts. You straighten, set down the boot, and prepare for whatever new story crosses your threshold. The knock on the door carries a different weight this time. Measured, polite, but insistent. You rise, stretching your back with a groan, and pull it open to reveal a servant in livery, the kind stitched with more care than most villagers will ever see. His cloak is damp from the drizzle, but even wet wool carries a certain stiffness that screams of higher households. He holds a bundle close, wrapped in cloth, and when he unties it, you nearly whistle. A pair of boots emerges, fine riding boots, tall, elegant, with stitching that once proclaimed wealth. The leather is supple, but cracked at the ankles, soles thinned, the sheen dulled. Boots like these rarely cross your threshold. They usually belong in manors, polished by other servants, never patched by village cobblers. You look at the servant, whose face is carefully neutral, but his eyes flicker with impatience. "My master requires them restored," he says flatly. No request, just requirement. You lift one boot and run your hand along the grain. This isn't cowhide, it's calfskin, soft enough to fold like parchment. Once, this boot must have gleamed in candlelight, striding across polished floors. Now, it looks weary, like a noble too long in the saddle. You turn it over, examining the sole, and mutter, "They've been ridden hard." The servant stiffens, but says nothing. Historians still argue whether nobles truly wore their best boots for riding, or saved them for appearances. Records suggest both. Some insisted on fine footwear for every outing, while others reserved rugged pairs for hunts. Either way, here in your shop, the line between noble and peasant blurs, The leather frays the same. The soles collapse just as surely. You set the boot on your bench and fetch your tools. The servant hovers, hands clasped behind his back, watching as though your every movement requires judgment. You almost want to joke that he could sweep the floor while he waits, but his expression makes you think humor would clang like a dropped nail. Instead, you busy yourself with preparation, trimming thread, softening wax, testing your aul's point. The repairs demand delicacy. This leather resists rough treatment, unlike the farmer's clogs you can batter into obedience. Each stitch must be precise, each nail driven with care. As you work, the servant shifts on his feet, clearly unaccustomed to waiting. You imagine his master pacing in some hall, fretting about appearances while you kneel here in smoke and scraps. You can't resist a small quip. "Funny thing," you say, threading the needle. "Leather doesn't care about titles. Treat it poorly, and it breaks, no matter whose foot presses it." The servant's lips twitch, but he schools his face quickly. Perhaps he agrees more than he dares say. You clean the leather with a cloth dipped in tallow, rubbing until the surface warms under your hand. The smell fills the shop. Rich, fatty, slightly sweet. It clings to your fingers, to the air, mingling with smoke. The servant wrinkles his nose faintly, unused to such scents. You suppress a grin. Nobles may dress in leather, but few know its true odor up close. As your needle dips, you tell a story. "Did you know," you murmur, "that in some courts, men's boots grew so pointed at the toes they had to tie them to their knees with chains to walk? Fashion before function." The servant blinks, startled, then lets out the smallest of chuckles. You nod knowingly. Historians still argue whether those ridiculous shoes were about status or simply vanity gone wild. I'd like to see a noble try mucking out stables in those. The repair stretches into rhythm. Pierce, pull, knot, hammer. You patch the sole. Add a strip of leather for strength, and polish until the boot sighs back into elegance. With each stroke of cloth, it regains dignity, as though remembering what it once was. The servant watches more intently now, perhaps realizing the skill in what looked like drudgery. You finish one boot and set it aside, gleaming faintly in the gray light. The servant leans forward, almost reverent. He opens his mouth, closes it, then finally mutters, "My master will be pleased." You arch an eyebrow, replying softly, "Then perhaps he'll remember cobblers keep his dignity from crumbling underfoot." The servant looks away, but you catch the flicker of agreement in his eyes. You tackle the second boot, your hands steady, despite the ache in your shoulders. As you work, your mind drifts. You wonder if nobles ever consider the lives of those who keep their finery intact. Cobblers, smiths, laundresses. Likely not. Yet their appearances, their very reputations, rest on invisible hands like yours. That thought carries both bitterness and pride. The second boot polishes beautifully, the leather soaking up oil like thirsty earth. You buff it until your arm burns, until you can see the faint reflection of the servant's face in its surface. He exhales slowly, almost relieved, and you realize he must have feared bringing them here. Perhaps failure would have earned him blame. Perhaps, in his own quiet way, he's as bound to these boots as you are. You finish, setting both boots side by side. They stand tall again, dignified, ready for stirrup or haul. The servant bows his head slightly, not to you, but to the work. He wraps them carefully in cloth, binding the bundle with twine. Then he places a small pouch of coins on your bench. The weight surprises you, more generous than expected. As he turns to leave, you can't resist one last wry remark. "Tell your master to keep them off the muddy road, or I'll be seeing them again next week." The servant almost smiles, but catches himself, nodding briskly before stepping into the drizzle. The door closes, and silence folds around you once more. The rain has turned from drizzle to steady patter, tapping the thatch above like impatient fingers. You glance upward, watching droplets slip through the seams and plop into the bucket by the hearth. That bucket is older than you, dented, rusted, patched more times than you can count. Still, it holds water faithfully, and you think perhaps it deserves sainthood. You mutter to yourself, if the saints can watch over leather, surely one can guard a leaky roof. The hearth sputters at the intrusion of damp air, smoke curling toward your eyes until they water. You wave it off, blinking. Hunger gnaws at you. The morning has stretched long, filled with boots and chatter, and your stomach growls like a hound. You set down your awl, stretch your aching fingers, and shuffle toward the corner where your pot hangs over the embers. Lifting the lid releases a wave of scent. Barley stew, thickened with carrots and onions, its surface glistening with the faint sheen of fat. Nothing grand, but warm, filling, and yours. You dip a ladle and pour a portion into a wooden bowl. The first sip burns your tongue, and you hiss, but the taste makes up for it. Earthy, hearty, comforting in its simplicity. You tear a chunk of coarse bread, stale at the edges but softened by the steam, and dip it into the broth. You chew slowly, savoring each bite as though it were finer than the noble's feast at the manor. As you eat, you think of how food, like shoes, marks the gulf between rich and poor. Nobles dine on roasted venison, sweetmeats, exotic spices. You chew onions, cabbage, the occasional bone if you're lucky. Historians still argue whether peasants were truly malnourished or simply lived on a cycle of monotony, enough to survive, rarely enough to thrive. You suspect both are true, depending on season, harvest, and luck. A fly buzzes lazily around the pot, circling like a knight guarding treasure. You wave it off, muttering curses under your breath. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some villagers believe flies are souls of the restless dead, buzzing back to check on the living. If so, this one must have been a glutton in life. You laugh softly at your own thought, though the sound dies quickly in the smoky room. You take another spoonful, leaning back on your stool, letting the warmth of the stew seep through you. Your back eases, your hands rest. For a brief moment, you forget the endless pile of shoes waiting. Outside, the village continues. Cries from the market, cartwheels squelching through mud, dogs barking in argument. But here, in this small pause, time feels yours. You break another piece of bread and remember a story your master once told. He claimed cobblers in Italy flavored their stews with scraps of leather when meat was scarce. You never believed him fully, but you've wondered. Leather boiled long enough might soften, release something vaguely edible. You shudder at the thought, staring at your bowl, silently grateful that today's stew holds real vegetables. Still, the tale lingers, absurd and unsettling. You whisper, "No thank you," to the scraps piled on your bench, and take another bite of bread. The rain intensifies, drumming harder on the roof. More drips sneak through, splashing onto the floor. You grab another bucket and slide it into place with the resignation of a man long accustomed to leaks. Each plop echoes like a slow metronome, a rhythm that syncs with the beating of your heart. You shake your head. "Patch leather all day, yet I never patch the roof," you mutter. The irony makes you chuckle, though your shoulders slump with the truth of it. The stew cools quickly, steam fading. You scrape the last of it with your bread, unwilling to waste a drop. Hunger quiets, though not completely. You think about supper later, perhaps the eggs the farmer left, fried if the hearth behaves, boiled if not. Nothing lavish, but then again, neither are your days. Your eyes drift to the window, little more than an opening with oiled cloth stretched across. The world outside blurs in streaks of rain. Villagers hurry past, cloaks pulled tight, heads down. Their boots splash through puddles, leaving trails that speak of your future work. Every step in the mud is another crack, another tear, another reason they'll find their way back to you. You almost smile at the inevitability. Historians still argue whether peasants truly minded the mud or simply accepted it as part of life. Some records describe endless complaints, while others suggest people trudged without thought, too busy with survival to curse every puddle. Watching them now, you think both must be true. Some scowl at the rain, some laugh as they splash. Mud is misery and play, nuisance and inevitability. You lean back, rubbing your stomach, feeling the stew settle, heavy and warm. A drowsiness creeps in, the kind that tempts you to doze even as work waits. You resist, forcing your eyes to the bench, where boots sprawl in silent accusation. You sigh, rising again, wiping your hands on your tunic. Rest is a luxury cobblers don't afford in the middle of the day. Shoes pile faster than hours. Before you return to stitching, you tend the hearth. The wood hisses at first, then catches, flames flickering back to life. The smoke curls upward, stubborn as ever. You stir the coals, coaxing warmth, muttering promises to someday fix the chimney properly. Someday, of course, never comes. You settle back onto your stool, tools waiting, leather patient but unyielding. The rhythm resumes. Awl, needle, thread, hammer. Yet the warmth of the stew lingers, wrapping around you like a cloak. For all the smoke, the leaks, the endless repairs, there is comfort in this routine. Shoes will always tear. Cobblers will always stitch. And in between, there will always be. The figure at the door shakes off the rain like a wet dog, droplets scattering onto your floorboards already darkened with damp. He steps in with a kind of cautious authority, the careful gait of a man carrying not his own shoes, but those of someone far above him. His cloak, though soaked, is finely woven, dyed deeper than most villagers could ever afford. He bows his head slightly, not out of deference to you, but out of habit drilled into him by the one he serves. In his hands, wrapped in linen, lies another bundle. When he sets it down on your bench and folds back the cloth, you cannot help the soft whistle that escapes. Riding boots again, but finer than the pair from the morning. Black, supple, elegant, even in their state of wear. Creases bend across the ankle where the leather has softened with use, and mud stains cling stubbornly along the sole. These boots have seen more than polished hallways. They have been in stirrups, perhaps on long hunts or journeys. The servant clears his throat. "My lord requires these ready by tomorrow," he says. Not a plea, not even a request, a requirement. You bite back a sardonic remark and simply nod, lifting one boot into your hands. It bends lightly, the leather sighing under your fingers. This is calfskin again, finer than anything a farmer could ever dream of, but just as mortal in its wear. Leather doesn't respect titles. Historians still argue whether noble footwear was crafted to last or simply to impress. Some evidence points to extravagant pairs designed only for a season of display. others to sturdier construction meant for years of hunting. Looking at this pair, you suspect both. Beauty first, endurance second. A dangerous combination, especially when vanity outruns function. You set the boot on your bench and pull your tools closer. The servant watches quietly, but you sense his unease. Perhaps he fears what will happen if the boots return less than perfect. You break the silence with a quip. Funny how nobles stride about as though they own the world, yet trip the same as anyone if their souls crack. The servant smothers a smile, then quickly schools his face. You let the moment pass, slipping into rhythm. You clean the mud first, scraping gently with a dull knife until the surface shows itself again. The smell rises, earthy, pungent, the scent of wet fields clinging to wealth. You rub the leather with a cloth dipped in oil, massaging it until it warms and glistens faintly. The servant leans closer, fascinated despite himself. You shake your head. All this polish, and still they'll ride through mud tomorrow. Here's a quirky tidbit you share while you work. In some places, nobles had boots lined with fur, not just for warmth, but to show off when they crossed their legs at table. Imagine that, displaying fur linings as though the soles of your feet were part of the feast. The servant chuckles softly before catching himself again. You grin, enjoying his brief rebellion. You stitch where the seams have weakened, pulling thread tight with patient rhythm. In out, pull, knot. The needle dips. The waxed cord hums through leather. The seam draws firm. Each motion feels deliberate, almost sacred, though you cloak it in sarcasm to keep from sounding pompous. The servant shifts, glancing toward the door, as though time itself were pressing on him. To fill the silence, you drift into another story. Historians still argue whether servants truly admired their masters or simply endured them. I think perhaps it's like leather. You bend because you must, not because you want. The servant's jaw tightens, but his eyes flicker with truth. He says nothing, and you don't press. Some truths are safer left unspoken. The boots transform slowly under your hands. Mud yields to polish, cracks close under thread. The leather drinks oil like parched earth. You hammer a new sole strip in place, each tap ringing like punctuation in your smoky shop. The servant watches with growing relief, though he hides it behind stillness. As you finish the first boot, you hold it up to the light leaking through your window. The black gleam returns, subdued but steady. Dignity restored, at least for a while. You set it aside and tackle the second. This one is worse. The heel worn thin, the seam nearly gaping. You mutter to yourself, ridden hard, neglected harder. The servant swallows, but says nothing. The rhythm resumes. Awl, needle, thread, hammer. In out, pull tight, polish. Your shoulders ache, your fingers stiffen, but the boot obeys. You imagine the noble striding tomorrow, unaware of the labor hidden in every step. That's the nature of your trade. Unseen, unsung, yet essential. When the second boot gleams beside the first, you exhale slowly. Together, they look almost new again, standing tall, dignified, ready for the eyes of courts and hunts. The servant's relief shows this time. He bows slightly, almost to the boots, perhaps in gratitude not for you, but for the disaster you've averted on his behalf. He places a purse on your bench, heavier than expected. Nobles may grumble about costs, but their servants know the price of failure is worse. You accept with a nod, neither fawning nor dismissive. Payment is payment. whether silver, eggs, or onions. As he wraps the boots again, you can't resist one final remark. Tell your lord not to ride them through swamps, unless he wants me to see them again tomorrow. The servant actually smiles this time, fleeting but real. He nods, then slips out into the rain, leaving your shop quieter than before. You sit back, rolling your shoulders, staring at the coins. They glimmer faintly in the dim light, a reminder that even invisible hands can draw worth when nobles need them. You brush the scraps from your lap, wipe your tools, and lean against the bench. The hearth pops, a spark leaping like laughter. The rain outside softens, fading to a drizzle again. Through the window, you see villagers splashing, cloaks huddled, boots dark with water. Each step writes its story in mud, and each story will sooner or later find its way to your bench. You sigh, resigned, amused, weary, and proud all at once. The day stretches forward, heavy with promise and labor. And just as you close your eyes for a breath, the door creaks once more. Another figure waits in the drizzle, another tale wrapped in leather, another demand for your hands. The rain slackens, softening to a mist, though the roof still drops water in a steady, irritating rhythm. You're bent over your bench again, finishing the last stitch on a farmer's sandal, when another shadow appears in the doorway. This time, it isn't a noble's servant or wide-eyed child. It's the familiar face of the miller's wife, her cheeks red from the cold, her voice brisk as she sets a small bundle at your feet. "His boots are splitting again," she announces, as if it's your fault leather ages. You smile faintly, nodding, and take the bundle with a sigh. The boots inside are plain, heavy, dusted with flour that seems to cling to everything from their household. You brush them gently, sneezing as the powder rises in a cloud. The woman chuckles and mutters, "Better flour than mud." She stands stiffly, arms crossed, watching as though daring you to say otherwise. You don't. Instead, you set the boots on your bench and reach for your awl. The cracks are worse than they looked at first glance. The soles gape like tired mouths, and the stitching has frayed until it hangs in sad threads. You prod at the seam, nodding slowly. "A week's work in the mill will do this," you murmur, half to yourself. Historians still argue whether millers were truly wealthy from their tolls or despised for their greed. Looking at these boots, you suspect both might be true. The man stands long hours, but he takes his portion of every grain. His wife fidgets under your silence, so you offer a small smile. They'll walk again, stronger than before. She relaxes slightly, though her eyes wander around your cramped shop. To distract her, you share a tidbit. Did you know some folk used flour paste to polish leather when oils ran short? It left boots shining but sticky. Rats loved them. Her laugh bursts out sharp and surprised. "Imagine rats chasing shoes," she says, shaking her head. For a moment, the tension lifts. You thread the needle, the wax catching the light as you pull it through. In, out, pull tight. In, out, pull tight. The sound of the thread against leather blends with the drip, drip, drip from your roof. It feels like a duet, your rhythm and the reins weaving together in stubborn persistence. The woman watches your hands closely. Perhaps she envies the calm of your work compared to the roar of the mill. Or perhaps she just wants her husband's boots ready before the weekends. As you stitch, you recall another story, one told in the alehouse often. They say a miller once stuffed old boots with grain to smuggle it past the Lord's men. Hidden beneath the sole, he carried away more than his toll, until rats chewed through the trick. Whether truth or tale, you never knew. Still, you share it now, and the woman laughs, muttering, "My husband had better not try that." Her tone carries equal parts humor and suspicion. The work continues, slow but steady. You reinforce the sole with an extra strip, hammering tiny nails in place. Each tap echoes through the small room, filling the silences her presence leaves. You notice how your tools feel heavier as the day wears on, though your hands move without thought. Years of practice make skill look effortless, though your back screams otherwise. When the repairs are nearly done, the woman shifts, pulling a small bundle from her cloak. Inside are 2 coarse loaves of bread, still warm from the oven. "Payment," she says simply. You smile, inhaling the scent. Yeast, smoke, the faint sweetness of rye. Better than coins sometimes. Bread fills bellies more directly than silver. You finish the final stitch, trim the thread, and buff the leather with a scrap of cloth. The boots sit on your bench, no longer cracked, no longer sagging. Not beautiful, but sturdy. Fit for trudging through flour and dust again. You hand them back with a small bow, as though presenting treasures. She nods once, satisfied, and gathers them up. Before she leaves, she lingers a moment at the door. "You keep this village walking," she says quietly, almost reluctant. Then she slips into the mist, vanishing among the sounds of carts and voices outside. You sit back, surprised by her words, the loaves still warm in your lap. Praise is rare, and it lingers longer than coins. You take a bite of the bread before setting it aside, savoring its softness. Outside, the mist thickens, cloaking the lane in gray. The market calls, faint but insistent. You know your work will soon carry you there, delivering repairs, trading talk, weaving through the heartbeat of the village. For now, though, you rest your hands on your knees and listen to the steady drip from the roof, the sound of time itself measured in water. The rain finally eases by the time you step outside. Boots slung over your arm. A small bundle of repairs tied in cloth. The village lane glistens, puddles scattered like small mirrors, reflecting the pale sky. You pull your cloak tighter and start toward the market square, each step soft in the damp earth. Your breath fogs faintly, though the air is warmer now, heavy with the mingled scents of wet straw, livestock, and fresh bread. The square hums with life, louder than your shop's quiet rhythm. Stalls stretch in uneven rows, covered by patched cloth sagging under rainwater. Women call out, voices sharp as bells, advertising onions, turnips, salted fish. Children dart between carts, laughing as they splash through puddles. Dogs bark, tails wagging, noses sniffing for scraps dropped in the mud. You pause at the edge, letting the noise wash over you. After hours bent over leather, the chaos feels both overwhelming and oddly comforting. You make your way to the baker's stall first. His wife greets you with a nod, her hands dusted white from flour. You pass her a pair of mended clogs, their soles stitched firmly, seams patched against damp. In return, she hands you a loaf still warm from the oven, its crust dark, crackling beneath your fingers. Bread for leather, simple barter, older than coin. As you continue through the square, familiar faces greet you. The farmer whose boots you stitched earlier stamps his foot proudly, showing anyone who will look how sturdy they feel now. You wave, amused at his eagerness. Near the well, a girl tugs at her mother's sleeve, pointing at you, whispering about the scraps you gave her. You pretend not to hear, though a small smile creeps across your lips. You stop at the fishmonger's stall, the air thick with brine. He offers you a string of herring, their silver scales gleaming in the dim light. In exchange, you hand him his repaired sandals, patched though not pretty. He laughs, saying beauty is wasted when your feet spend all day in salt water. Historians still argue whether markets truly bound medieval villages together as communal centers or merely as noisy necessities. Standing here, surrounded by barter and chatter, you suspect both are true. A group of women cluster near the cloth merchant, voices carrying in urgent whispers. You catch fragments, taxes rising, rumors of a new levy, the Lord demanding more grain. The words ripple like wind through tall grass, repeated and reshaped until no one knows the source. You keep walking, clutching your bundle tighter. Politics and cobblers rarely mix well. Better to mend leather than tempers. Still, gossip follows you like smoke. A shepherd pauses at your side, grinning slyly as he tells you of a wolf seen near the forest edge. He claims it's larger than any dog, eyes glowing red in the dark. You nod, though you've heard a dozen such tales. Historians still argue whether wolves truly stalked villages as often as legends suggest, or whether fear grew larger than the beasts themselves. Either way, you know Boots will tread warily on the forest paths tonight. At the alehouse stall, the smell of warm beer drifts thick and inviting. You trade a small repair for a cup, sipping as foam clings to your lip. The drink is flat, bitter, but comforting in its way. Men around you argue about saints, witches, and distant wars. One swears he saw a comet blaze across the sky last night, an omen of famine. Another insists it was no comet, but the lantern of a wandering spirit. You shake your head, hiding a smile. Here's a quirky tidbit you toss into their debate. In some villages, people believed comets were fiery shoes kicked across the heavens by giants. The men roar with laughter, pounding their mugs. Your errands continue. You deliver Boots, Collect payment in beans, onions, dried herbs. Each trade adds weight to your satchel, though never in coin. You accept it, as cobblers always have. The language of barter, older than kings. By the time you've circled the square, your satchel is heavy, your hands sore, and your cloak damp again from the drizzle that never quite ends. You pause at the well, resting your load on the edge. The stone is slick with rain, cold against your palms. Around you, the square continues to buzz. Voices haggling, children laughing, animals bleating. You close your eyes for a moment, letting the sounds weave together, a tapestry of village life. Every face here, every boot trudging through the mud, is a thread in the same fabric. You are part of it, though always slightly apart, bound to your bench, your tools, your leather. When you open your eyes, the square seems smaller, the noise less sharp. You gather your satchel, sling it over your shoulder, and turn toward home. The walk back feels longer, your boots heavy with mud, your mind heavier with thoughts. Yet there is comfort in the rhythm of footsteps, the certainty that tomorrow will bring the same. More repairs, more barter, more stories stitched into leather. The lane narrows as you leave the square, houses huddled close, smoke curling from chimneys. Children dart past, chasing a stray chicken, laughing as it flaps wildly. You step aside, watching them disappear into the drizzle. Your shop waits ahead, its crooked roof familiar as your own hands. You push open the door, the hinges groaning in welcome, and step back into the smoke, the warmth, the solitude. You set down your satchel, sort the goods onto shelves, the bread beside the eggs, the fish near the onions, the herbs hung carefully by the hearth. The shop smells richer now, layered with scents of trade. You sit at your bench, flex your sore fingers, and pick up the next pair of boots. Outside, the village hum fades with the evening. Inside, the rhythm begins again. The evening presses close, gray light dimming through your oiled cloth window. You settle back onto your stool, boots in hand, when the door creaks open without a knock. This time, it isn't a farmer or servant, but a man you know well, the innkeeper from the alehouse. His belly strains against his belt, his cheeks ruddy from drink, though not unpleasantly so. He carries a pair of shoes under his arm, but he also carries the unmistakable air of gossip. "Thought I'd stop by," he announces, as though you invited him. He sets the shoes on your bench with a heavy thud. They're plain, worn from endless pacing behind the alehouse counter, soles soft with spilled beer. You nod at them, already seeing how you'll patch them. But the innkeeper doesn't care about the shoes. He leans forward, eyes bright, ready to pour words as easily as he pours ale. "You should have heard them tonight," he begins, voice low, but eager. One man swore he saw lights in the marsh dancing like spirits. Another claimed the Lord Steward has been skimming coin from the tolls, and then... He lowers his voice further, eyes wide. "A peddler spoke of witches up north. Women who curse soldiers with nothing but a glance." You thread your needle slowly, letting his words wash over you. Gossip is the true currency of the alehouse, more valuable than coins, more lasting than beer. Historians still argue whether such stories were believed or merely enjoyed as entertainment. Judging by the innkeeper's fervor, belief and entertainment blur easily. As you stitch, you add your own quip. If witches could curse with a glance, half the village would be doomed already. I've seen wives glare harder than any spell. The innkeeper roars with laughter, slapping your bench so hard your tools rattle. His mirth fills the small shop, louder than your hearth ever manages. You mend in rhythm, his voice the backdrop to your steady stitching. He rambles about saints, relics, soldiers passing through with tales of wars that feel as distant as stars. You nod, occasionally tossing in a sarcastic comment. When he mentions a soldier boasting of slaying 10 men in a single battle, you mutter, "And I once stitched 10 boots in a single breath." He nearly falls off the stool laughing. Here's a quirky tidbit you offer while polishing his shoes. In some towns, innkeepers were required by law to provide not just ale, but information. Travelers expected news as much as drink, and failure to deliver could hurt business. He grins proudly at that, puffing his chest, as though his gossip is now elevated to civic duty. The shoes transform slowly under your hands. The cracked seams close, the soles stiffen with new patches, the leather drinks oil and gleams faintly again. You set them down, and the innkeeper leans forward, inspecting them with exaggerated seriousness. "Better than new," he declares, though you suspect he says that to everyone. Before he leaves, he slides a small jug across your bench. "Payment," he says simply. You lift it, uncorking to catch the smell of ale. Thicker, stronger than what he usually serves. A brewer's gift, worth more than coin on a cold night. You nod in thanks, and he claps you on the shoulder. "You keep our feet steady," he says warmly, "and I'll keep the tales flowing." When the door closes behind him, the silence feels heavier than before. The jug sits on your bench, promising comfort later. You wipe your tools clean, lean back, and let your thoughts wander. Outside, the village hum fades to a murmur. Inside, only the crackle of your hearth and the faint drip from your roof remain. You think about the stories he told, the witches, the steward, the lights in the marsh. Truth or invention, they weave into the fabric of life as surely as your stitches. Historians still argue whether such tales shaped people's fears or simply passed time on dark nights. You suspect both. After all, fear is just another kind of entertainment when ale flows. Your eyes drift to the jug again. You lift it, sip cautiously. The ale is bitter, rich, clinging to your tongue. Warmth spreads down your throat, easing the day's ache. You let out a slow sigh, shoulders slumping. For all the smoke, the leaks, the endless mending, there is solace here. Work done, payment earned, stories traded. Tomorrow, it will all begin again, and that constancy carries its own strange peace. You set the jug aside, close your eyes briefly, and listen. Beyond the walls, owls stir, hooting softly in the distance. Somewhere, a dog barks, then quiets. The village exhales, settling into night. You open your eyes again, glance at the boot still waiting on your bench, and smile wryly. Even in sleep, shoes will whisper for your hands. You stretch, bones creaking, and prepare to tackle another repair before true darkness falls. But before you thread the needle again, you pause, savoring the quiet after the innkeeper's storm of words. In this hush, your shop feels almost sacred, not for saints or relics, but for the rhythm of work that binds you to every step taken in this village. The evening deepens, shadows stretching long across your bench as the hearthlight flickers. You reach for another pair of shoes, this time delicate slippers, softer than most you handle. Their pale leather has cracked gently at the toes, the stitching loose along the sides. Clearly not made for fields or mud, but for floors swept clean and gatherings where appearances mattered. You smile faintly, wondering how such finery ever found its way to your smoky little shop. You set them on your lap, smoothing the worn leather with careful fingers. They feel fragile, like parchment left too long in the sun. You thread your needle, wax catching the glow of the fire, and begin the slow process of mending. Each puncture is lighter than usual, each pull more cautious. The slippers are stubborn in their delicacy. Too much force, and they will tear. Too little, and the stitches will not hold. As you work, candlelight pools across the bench, casting shadows that dance like restless spirits. You think about how candles themselves are luxuries for some. Farmers live by the sun, rising and resting with its rhythm. Nobles squander wax as though it were endless. Here, you burn each stub carefully, the wax dripping into a hardened mound at the base. Historians still argue whether peasants truly lacked candles or simply rationed them so harshly that the memory of darkness defined their nights. Looking at your dwindling stub, you suspect the latter. A moth flutters near the flame, wings beating frantic against the light. You sigh, gently brushing it away before it can scorch itself. "Not tonight, friend," you murmur, voice low. The moth tumbles back into shadow, and you return to stitching. In, out, pull tight, breathe. The rhythm lulls you, steady as a lullaby. Here's a quirky tidbit you recall, one whispered by an old tanner. Some claimed soft slippers were once lined with herbs, thyme or lavender, to sweeten the air around noble feet. You chuckle softly, picturing a lord strutting with fragrant toes, more concerned with scent than step. You mutter under your breath, if only peasants could perfume their boots, the whole market might smell less of onions. The thought makes you laugh quietly, though the sound feels strange in the stillness. The hearth cracks, sending sparks into the air. You glance at the roof, half expecting another leak, but the storm has passed. Only the slow drip remains, a reminder of water that always finds its way through. You shift on your stool, spine aching, shoulders stiff. Each repair carves its toll into your body, but the slippers demand patience, and you grant it. As you polish the finished seam, you think of another debate that drifts through chronicles, whether common folk envied noble luxuries or ignored them. Some records suggest peasants longed for silks, spices, and soft slippers. Others claim they mocked such fripperies, too concerned with survival to waste thought on them. You suspect both are true, envy in quiet moments, laughter in loud ones. After all, mockery costs nothing. The slippers gleam faintly now, their cracks smoothed, their seams holding. Not perfect, not new, but dignified enough for another evening on polished floors. You set them aside gently, as though they might bruise if handled roughly. Candlelight shimmers across them, and for a moment, you almost admire their elegance, almost. Then your stomach growls, reminding you elegance never fills a belly. You rise, stretching stiffly, and ladle water into a pot. The eggs the farmer gave you sit on the shelf, waiting. You place 2 into the pot, watching them roll lazily in the bubbling water. The scent of boiling eggs soon mingles with smoke, earthy and simple. You cut a slice of bread, chew it slowly as the eggs cook, savoring the chew even though it's coarse. While you eat, You drift into thought. Shoes, slippers, boots, they all carry stories. Farmers' clogs tell of mud and sweat. Traders' boots tell of bargaining tongues. Nobles' riding boots tell of vanity and hunts. These slippers whisper of dances, feasts, laughter under candlelight. Each soul you touch binds you, however briefly, to lives beyond your own. Historians still argue whether craftsmen like you left any true mark on history. You suspect they forget that every stride in every story rested on leather stitched by hands like yours. You peel the eggs, steam curling upward, and eat them slowly. The warmth spreads through you, easing the ache in your stomach. The day has been long, yet work remains. You rinse the pot, set it aside, and return to your bench. The slippers rest finished, and more shoes wait. You sigh, rubbing your temples, and pick up another pair. The candle gutters low, its flame bending, wax dripping faster now. You trim the wick carefully, coaxing it to last longer. Shadows leap, stretching along the walls like silent witnesses. The hearth's glow fades too, and you feed it one last stick, listening to the pop and hiss as it catches. Silence grows heavier with night. Outside, voices fade. Doors shut. Dogs settle. The village exhales again, leaving only the owls and the distant croak of frogs by the marsh. Inside, your shop feels suspended, timeless. The world narrowed to leather, thread, and firelight. You lean back, resting your head against the wall, eyes drifting to the slippers, gleaming faintly on your bench. They look almost out of place among the clogs and boots. Yet they belong here now, stitched by your hands, tied to your labor. That thought soothes you, like a thread pulled snug across a seam. You close your eyes briefly, not asleep, but drifting, the hum of the day settling into your bones. The quiet holds you, steady as your stitches, and you breathe deep, letting it anchor you. Tomorrow will bring more shoes, more barter, more stories. But tonight, there is only the glow of fire, the whisper of leather, and the soft gleam of slippers in the dark. The slippers sit finished, their faint gleam casting an odd contrast against the pile of rougher boots waiting their turn. You rub your hands together, feeling the wax still clinging to your fingertips, and reach for the next pair. Before you can begin, The door creaks once again. This time, the visitor is familiar. Not a noble servant or wandering child, but your neighbor, the fisherman. His cloak drips steadily, carrying the sharp scent of river water, and his face is lined with fatigue. He sets a pair of sandals on your bench, the leather straps frayed, the soles thin as parchment. "Caught them on the rocks again," he mutters, shaking his head. He reaches into his satchel and produces a bundle wrapped in cloth. When he opens it, the smell of salted herring fills the shop. "Payment," he adds, voice flat, but eyes apologetic. You nod, already reaching for your all. Fish for leather. It isn't glamorous, but it keeps your hearth smoking and your belly full. The sandals are simple, more holes than straps now. Yet you treat them with the same care as noble boots. You thread your needle, pierce the leather, and fall into rhythm. In, out, pull tight. In, out, pull tight. The fisherman sits nearby, shoulders hunched, staring into the fire as though it might answer questions he can't voice. To break the silence, you offer a tidbit. "Did you know," you say lightly, "Romans once paid their soldiers in salted fish when coin ran short. Called it salarium, which gave us the word salary." The fisherman chuckles, though softly, shaking his head. "Then I must be rich already," he replies. His voice carries no pride, only weary humor. Historians still argue whether barter was truly the backbone of village life, or if coin quietly ruled even here. Looking at the sandals in your hands, you suspect both. Barter fills stomachs, but coins open gates. Buy passage, pay rents. Yet here you are, grateful for fish, because fish will feed you tonight, while coins would only clink on the bench. You patch the straps, adding new leather cut from your pile of scraps. The fisherman watches, his eyes heavy, his hands fidgeting. Finally, he mutters, "River's thinner this season. Nets bring less. Some say the Lord's men take too much upstream." You nod without comment. Complaints against lords are dangerous, even whispered in smoke. Still, his words hang between you like damp cloth. You change the subject gently. "Once heard a tale," you say, "of a fisherman who swore he caught a boot instead of a trout. Claimed it belonged to a drowned knight." The fisherman snorts, shaking his head. "Better a boot than nothing at all." For a moment, laughter eases his shoulders. The sandals come together slowly, the seams tightening, the soles reinforced with thin strips. They're not beautiful, but they'll hold against rocks a little longer. You hand them back, and the fisherman studies them, as though they're a gift from the river itself. He places the bundle of herring firmly on your bench, nods once, and rises. Before he leaves, he pauses at the door. "You keep us walking," he says quietly, echoing words you've heard before, but never tire of. Then he slips into the night, the smell of river trailing behind him. You unwrap the fish, their silver scales dull in the firelight. You hang them near the hearth, letting the smoke curl around them, preserving them for days ahead. The smell fills the shop, sharp, briny, mixing with leather and wax. An odd perfume, but one that speaks of survival. You sit again, leaning against the wall, staring at the sandals left behind on the bench. They're patched, sturdy, ready for another round of rocks and riverbanks. You sigh, rolling your shoulders, the ache in your spine growing heavier with each repair. Yet pride lingers too. Every barter, every stitch, every trade weaves you deeper into the life of the village. Historians still argue whether cobblers were essential artisans or simply background laborers. You smile wryly. Without you, the fisherman would limp barefoot on stones. The farmer would hobble in mud. The noble would lose dignity before his peers. Essential or not, your work binds their days together. The hearth crackles, smoke drifting lazily upward. You pull your cloak tighter, though the warmth soothes your bones. The fish hang near the flames, swaying gently as though nodding approval. You close your eyes briefly, not asleep, but resting. Tomorrow will bring more shoes, more barter, more stories stitched into seams. But tonight, you savor the weight of fish in your larder, the glow of slippers on your bench, the rhythm of leather holding lives together. Outside, the village quiets further. Dogs settle, voices fade. Only the distant croak of frogs fills the night air. Inside, your shop holds steady, smoke and fish mingling, tools resting, leather waiting. You breathe deep, slow, and steady, letting the rhythm of the day ease into silence. The quiet after the fisherman's departure doesn't last long. Your head has barely settled against the wall when a faint strain of music drifts in from outside. At first, you think it's your imagination, the crackle of the fire playing tricks. But no, it grows clearer, weaving through the night air. A lute, soft and lilting, its notes wandering like smoke across the village. You rise, stretching your stiff back, and step to the doorway. There, Near the square, a small crowd gathers around a wandering minstrel. His cloak is patched, his boots thin, but his hands coax melodies from the lute that hold even the rowdiest children still. His voice follows, light yet strong, telling tales of distant kings, battles fought on fields no villager here will ever see, and saints who walked barefoot into heaven. You lean against the frame of your door, listening as the notes dance in the mist. Minstrels appear rarely in your village, and when they do, the air shifts. Even the weary farmer pauses to listen. Even the stern miller's wife allows herself a smile. The cobbles of the square seem to shimmer with the music, and for a moment, mud feels less heavy, life less drudging. Historians still argue whether minstrels truly carried news or simply embroidered tales for coin. Judging by this one's sly grin as he strums, you suspect a mix of both. You wander closer, carrying a small stool from your shop. Settling down, you let the lute's rhythm blend with the thrum of your own heartbeat. The minstrel sings of a queen who disguised herself as a peasant to spy on her enemies, and the crowd gasps in delight. You chuckle softly. If queens can hide in plain boots, perhaps my work is more royal than I thought. A few villagers nearby laugh, nudging each other. The minstrel shifts to a livelier tune, his fingers dancing across the strings. Children clap, some attempting to dance in the mud, their feet slapping wetly. One boy trips and falls, splattering himself head to toe. Laughter erupts, the boy grinning despite the mess. You shake your head, muttering that mud is the one companion who never refuses a dance. Between songs, the minstrel speaks, weaving riddles and jokes into his tales. He teases the shepherd about his stubborn sheep, asks the blacksmith if his hammer sings sweeter than a lute, and even glances at you. And our cobbler here, he declares, mends not only souls but souls, for who can walk in despair with sturdy boots beneath them? The crowd cheers, clapping, and you feel your cheeks flush despite yourself. Praise, even in jest, warms more deeply than the hearth. Here's a quirky tidbit you recall, fitting for the moment. In some towns, minstrels were considered dangerous, accused of stirring unrest with their songs. Lords feared their verses could spark rebellion, turning laughter into anger. You mutter it aloud, and a man beside you nods thoughtfully. Perhaps, he says, but better a song than silence. You agree silently, watching as the minstrel's notes chase away the night's weariness. As the performance ends, villagers toss coins, bread, even onions into the minstrel's bag. You hesitate, then rise and fetch a small scrap of polished leather from your bench. You press it into his hand, murmuring, "For your lute, wrap it where it rubs." He grins, eyes crinkling, and bows deeply. Even minstrels need cobblers, he says, slipping the leather into his satchel. The crowd disperses slowly, laughter trailing into the night. You return to your shop, the echo of the lute still lingering in your ears. Inside, the fire has burned low, casting long shadows. You set your stool back, sink onto it, and let out a long breath. The shop feels smaller after the open square, quieter after music, but it is yours. Historians still argue whether villages like yours were shaped more by daily labor or by rare moments of wonder like a minstrel's visit. You suspect both, the rhythm of stitching, the surprise of song. One without the other would make life unbearable. Together, they stitch days into something almost whole. You reach for your tools again, though your hands tremble slightly from fatigue. Another pair of boots waits, patient, heavy, silent. You touch the worn leather, but your mind still hums with the minstrel's tune. It follows you like a thread, weaving into your rhythm. In, out, pull tight. In, out, pull tight. Work and music, inseparable, both anchoring and lifting. The night deepens. Owls hoot softly, and the frogs in the marsh resume their chorus. You stitch by the glow of the fire, each seam steady, each knot firm. The village sleeps, but your shop remains awake, a small beacon of labor and smoke. You pause once, sip from the jug of ale, and smile faintly as the warmth spreads through you. When the boots are done, you set them gently on the bench, side by side, like weary companions ready for another day. You lean back, eyes heavy, and let the silence settle. Yet beneath it, you still hear the echo of the minstrel's voice, carrying tales that will linger long after the fire dies. The fire has burned low, embers glowing faintly like tired eyes staring from the hearth. You stretch your hands toward the warmth, rubbing sore fingers together, when the door creaks yet again. Tonight seems endless, a parade of footsteps across your threshold. This time, though, the figure is familiar in its silence. Your neighbor's eldest son, tall now, though still awkward in his movements. He carries no shoes in hand, only a message. Mother says the blacksmith's sandals need mending, he mutters, dropping a bundle on your bench before you can respond. Then, without waiting for a word, he vanishes back into the night, the door groaning shut behind him. You stare at the bundle, shaking your head. Teenagers, you think, walk like kings, but speak like mice. You unwrap the sandals, grimacing at their state. The soles are cracked, the straps stiff from heat and ash. They reek faintly of smoke, the blacksmith's forge clinging to them like a second skin. You sigh, pulling your stool closer, and begin sorting through scraps to find leather tough enough to withstand fire. As you work, the village outside quiets even more. The last voices fade, shutters close, and only the faint howl of wind breaks the stillness. You stitch in rhythm with the silence, your needle piercing the charred leather, your hands moving with weary precision. In, out, pull tight. In, out, pull tight. The sound echoes softly in the small room. You mutter to yourself, half amused. A cobbler's day never ends, does it? Even when the stars are up, the souls still split. Here's a quirky tidbit you recall. Some medieval towns had curfews where craftsmen were forbidden to work after dark, supposedly to prevent fires. Historians still argue whether those laws were about safety or about lords wanting quiet nights. You smirk, glancing at your hearth. If the lord wanted silence, he'd better come stitch these sandals himself. The repairs drag on, slower than usual. The leather resists, brittle from heat, and you coax it patiently back into shape. As your needle dips, your mind drifts. You think of the blacksmith, hammer ringing day after day, his arms strong as oak, his temper short as sparks. You've often traded jokes with him, though always carefully. Once he quipped that cobblers stitched leather while he forged iron, and you replied, "Leather carries men further than iron ever will." He laughed then, but you wonder if he truly believed it. The sandals finally begin to look whole again. You replace the sole strip, hammering nails with quick taps that echo like distant bells. Sweat beads on your forehead, despite the chill. The effort of precision demanding more than your body wants to give. Still, you persist. Shoes don't mend themselves, no matter how much your back begs you to stop. When the last stitch is tied, you set the sandals aside and lean back, exhaling deeply. They aren't beautiful, but they'll serve the blacksmith another season. You rub your temples, staring at the dim light of the candle guttering low. The wax has nearly melted to nothing, the flame wobbling, threatening to vanish. You trim the wick carefully, coaxing a little more life from it. Shadows leap across the walls, long and strange, making your small shop feel larger, emptier. You think of another debate among scholars, whether craftsmen like you worked by candlelight often, or simply collapsed with the sun. Some argue nights were for rest, others that work continued when coin demanded. Looking at your blistered hands, you know the truth. Rest and work were never divided cleanly. Shoes tore when they wished, and cobblers stitched until they held. Your stomach growls, breaking the silence. You glance at the herring hanging near the hearth, their silver skins dulled by smoke. You consider frying one, but fatigue outweighs hunger. Tomorrow, you tell yourself. Tonight it is enough to sit, to breathe, to let the day drain from your bones. You rise slowly, stretching until your back pops. The sandals sit neatly on the bench, waiting for morning. You sweep the scraps from the floor, brush shavings into a pile, wipe your tools clean with a rag stiff from use. The ritual soothes you, each motion closing the day's chapter. The shop smells of wax, smoke, leather, and faintly of fish, a perfume no noble would cherish, but one that defines your world. Finally, you tie the door with twine, securing it loosely. Thieves are rare here, but habit keeps your hands steady. You step outside for a moment, breathing in the night air. The village lies hushed, cloaked in mist. Smoke drifts from chimneys. Owls call softly, and the moon peeks from behind clouds like a shy guest. You stand there, listening, feeling the cool, damp air settle into your cloak. You think about how every house hides stories tonight. Farmers resting their backs, children clutching scraps of leather, traders counting coins, servants fretting over noble boots polished or not. And you, Cobbler, stitching the threads that carry them all forward. Historians still argue whether men like you shaped history. Perhaps not. But you know one truth. Without shoes, no one walks far. You return inside, extinguish the candle, and settle onto your straw mattress. The hearth glows faintly, embers humming like lullabies. You close your eyes, though your mind still stitches, pulling threads across seams in dreams. Tomorrow will come with new knocks, new barter, new laughter, and complaints. Tonight, though, you let the quiet hold you, steady as a stitch pulled snug. Morning comes again, pale light slipping through the oiled cloth window, though you barely notice. The night was short, your sleep shallow, filled with half-dreams of needles piercing endlessly, of souls splitting no matter how many times you stitched them. You wake stiff, your back groaning as though it resents the straw you slept on. Stretching, you rise, every bone sounding its complaint. Another day waits, though part of you still lingers in yesterday. You shuffle to the hearth, stirring the embers. Smoke curls, stubborn and familiar, clinging to your tunic before you even sit down at your bench. The sandals from last night rest there, finished, quiet, ready to be claimed. For a moment you admire them, though admiration is a poor habit in your trade. They are sturdy, nothing more, and sturdiness is enough. Your tools wait, spread across the bench in their patient arrangement. Awl, hammer, needles, thread, scraps. They look the same as always, yet each carries its own story. Its own scars from years of labor. You pick up the awl, feeling its smooth handle. How many thousands of times have you pressed it into leather? Too many to count. And still, it feels steady, like an extension of your hand. Outside, the village stirs. A rooster crows, children call, dogs bark. The market will soon wake, voices rising, barter beginning. You imagine boots clomping through mud, sandals slapping stone, clogs crunching straw. All of them will return, sooner or later, to your bench. That is the certainty of leather. It yields, it wears, it demands repair. You think again of the minstrel's song, lingering from the night before. His lute carried tales of kings, queens, and battles, yet it was his words about you that linger most. Mending souls, mending souls. You chuckle softly. Perhaps he meant it kindly. Perhaps he meant it as jest. Still, the phrase rings true in its way. Each shoe you stitch carries someone forward, into fields, markets, hearths, and sometimes even into halls where nobles strut. Historians still argue whether cobblers like you mattered in the sweep of things. They speak of kings, lords, treaties, wars. Yet who marched into battle without boots? Who tilled fields barefoot in winter? No one whose name lasted. You suspect history forgets you because your work was too constant, too ordinary, too essential. Ordinary things rarely earn praise, yet without them, nothing extraordinary can stand. You polish the sandals once more, rubbing oil into the leather until it glows faintly in the dim light. Finished. You set them aside, sweep the bench, and lean back. The day has only begun, but your body already longs for rest. Age creeps in quietly, one stitch at a time, one ache after another. Still, you endure, because that is what cobblers do. A knock sounds faintly at the door, but you do not rise immediately. Whoever waits can linger a moment longer. You close your eyes, breathing deep, listening to the rhythm of the village outside, the heartbeat of life stitched together by countless unseen hands. You think of the farmer, the trader, the fisherman, the children, the servant, the noble, the minstrel. Each of them passed through your shop, their souls carried forward by your quiet labor. You smile, weary but content. Now the story softens, slowing its rhythm, as though each word takes longer to cross the air. You imagine yourself lying back, the bench behind you fading, the fire sinking to faint embers. The smell of leather, smoke, and bread drifts together into something gentle, no longer sharp, no longer insistent. You breathe deeply, letting the scents wrap around you like a blanket. Your body grows heavy, the day's work receding, every stitch already behind you. The village outside hums quietly, its sounds blurred, softened, distant, as though wrapped in cloth. Footsteps fade, voices dim, and only the hush of wind through the eaves remains. You let it carry you, like water slipping through reeds, smooth, steady, calming. In this moment, the cobbler's world falls away, leaving only stillness. You do not need to rise or mend or barter. You simply rest, every muscle loosening, every thought unspooling. The floor beneath you feels softer, the air warmer, and the shadows lengthen without menace. They are gentle shadows, companions to sleep, steady in their silence. You drift through the rhythm of your own breathing, each inhale long, each exhale longer.